A question I get asked fairly often is whether story becomes easier with experience. And I think it's a great question, but the word easier might be the wrong word. I think it's more about simpler. Storytelling does become simpler. When you first start learning the craft, it feels like this mountain of complexity that you're trying to climb and you can't quite see the other side of it and stuff. But after a while, a certain simplicity starts to emerge. So let's start with the most basic aspect of a story, right? That it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that sounds obvious and self-evident, but really landing those is not. So let's talk about that, because that's the foundation that makes any story work. So at the beginning of the story, there has to be a handshake. What does that mean? So let me say I'm telling you a story in real life. For instance, so I get on the bus this morning, and you're not gonna believe there's this woman, and she seems very nice, but she's got a red coat, and then this guy who has a dog with him, not too aggressive, the dog, but not super friendly, you know what I mean? And then the door opens, and this other guy. All right, so there's no way as an audience you can get on board with that story, and it's not by lack of understanding, because you understood every word I said, but you don't know how to feel about them, right? And so as an audience, you can't relax and get on board with the story because you don't know what you're in for. So doesn't mean, of course, that you have to tell them everything, but you have to create that handshake. So for instance, that's why in real life, if I was telling you a story about the bus, it would go like this. I'd go like, dude, you're not going to believe what happened this morning on the bus. Oh, really? What happened? No. It's fine, it's cool. No one got hurt, but check this out, right? So now we're ready for the story. We're relaxed and ready to engage. And that was going to be a positive story probably, or an amusing story, but sometimes it's not the case. Maybe I see you down the street and I go like, oh boy, I gotta tell you, I'm very, very sorry Joe passed away. And you're like, oh, Joe, but I just saw him yesterday, he was in good health, and yeah, so let me tell you what happened. And here too, now we're ready for the story. It's probably going to be a bad story, but we're ready for it because there has been a handshake from storyteller to audience that makes the storytelling process now possible. Another crucial aesthetic element to storytelling is as follows. Every story lives on the scale between imagination and immediacy. Imagination and immediacy. So imagination doesn't require any explanation, right? It's like all the fun stuff that you can come up with that gets people to buy the book or go, see the movie. That's fine. But immediacy is the fact that the audience can immediately relate to the material, that they have an emotional and logical and in all sorts of ways that a mind can engage with something, that there's an immediate understanding of things. So for instance, let's pitch Raiders of the Lost Ark, and let's do it this way. So it's pre-World War II, and the Nazis are getting ready for war, and they're going everywhere around the world looking for secret weapons that they can have in their back pocket to win the war whenever they start it. And the CIA sends this guy who's like an adventurer / archaeologist to find this one secret weapon before the Nazis do. Okay, great. So that pitch is 100% immediacy. What that means is that you not only immediately understood every single word of it, but you knew how to feel about it, right? So pre-World War II, yeah, I get that. The Nazis, ooh, they're bad, trying to get secret weapons so they can win the war. I get it. But it's like, wait, but why is it special? Well, it's not quite special yet because it's missing one thing, which is that, and the secret weapon everybody's after is the Ark. So now that's imagination. And so when you're listening to the pitch, the actual pitch, which should be pre-World War II, the Nazis are looking for secret weapons all around the world to get ready for the war, and this guy who's an adventurer and an archaeologist tries to get to that ultimate weapon before they do, the Ark of the Covenant that will bring the power of God on earth for, for 1,000 years and stuff. So when you're listening to this pitch as a listener, what your reaction is intended to be is that you go like, I get it, makes sense, oh yeah, gotcha, what? And that is kind of the ratio of immediacy to imagination that you want. Because too much imagination, you may still understand what I said, but you're not going to know how to feel about it. So that brings us to the end of the beginning. And the end of the beginning is the moment when the audience understands what's going on, they're on board, emotionally, mentally, all that stuff, but most importantly, they understand what the character is trying to do. And that is the essence of the dramatic form. It's contained in this one sentence, which, if I remember correctly, is a Robert McKee concept. The phrase is coined that way. Is that every story goes like this. Someone has to do something that is really hard, and something terrible will happen if they fail. It sounds incredibly simple, but it's actually very hard to check all those boxes. Like someone, like a professor who's also an archaeologist, that's interesting, never seen that one before, has to find this secret artifact that's been hidden for 6,000 years before the Nazis do it. Hard to do. Or they will get it first, the Nazis, and then rule the world for 1,000 years. Super bad. That is the form. There is nothing else. So what's really interesting though is that form is a fractal one. And what I mean by it is that it works, and it is actually what makes the story work at every scale. Because you've seen it when I was pitching Raiders as the whole movie, but it also works in every single scene. So for instance, the opening sequence of Toy Story. A bunch of toys who are alive when you're not watching, that's someone, that's interesting, have to cross this entire human birthday party undetected, hard to do, to try to make sure that in the present there's not a super cool toy that, if they let him in, if there was one and they let him in, he may displace their entire social, emotional order that they have as toys in this house, which from their standpoint would be extremely bad. So as you can see, the exact same form, and again I will repeat, that is the form, there is nothing else. Not only works on the scale of the movie, but it works on every, for every sequence. And what's interesting is also with the Toy Story example is that it's the introduction to a character. And how to introduce a character dynamically is a key question, and the answer is also in this form. Because what you do not want to do is the, Miss Marple, as you may or may not know, so-and-so, who was the two characters talking to each other about a third character. That's, among the people I always quote who I think are masters of storytelling and are very inspiring, like David Mamet, for instance, is one. And he always said that never have a scene, if you can avoid it, with two people talking about a third one who's not there. The way we care about characters is by seeing them try to do something hard that would have where failure would have dire consequences from their standpoint. And as humans, that's enough for us to get on board. All right, so now we have our story in motion. Now we get to the second part, which is crucial, which is the middle, and which is the part where people very often get stuck, right? So in the middle, something happens. And what I mean by that is something happens that flips the whole story around. For instance, Star Wars again. Now it's the middle of the movie. Luke is on the Millennial Falcon with Obi-Wan, and it looks like he's pretty good with the Force. And for the first time, we hear that the Force has a dark side. And if you go into it with ego, the dark side will take you. And at that moment, the entire story hinges. And where the first part was the wish fulfillment of maybe becoming a Jedi, the second part become hopefully escaping the curse of the Sith. So that point where the want and the need start to transition into each other, and the central conflict for the character goes from trying to actualize the want into either accepting or denying the need, that is the core of the movie. And that point in the story is when you get what I call the pun in the title. And what I mean by that is that you realize that the title has a different meaning that you thought. Like, The Walking Dead. Oh yeah, The Walking Dead, zombies, it's obvious, right? Except deeper in, you realize that no, actually The Walking Dead that the title refers to is not the zombies. It's the humans who are walking around but still kind of fighting to retain their humanity or not. So now it's the very end of the story, and Luke is exactly in the position that he wanted to be in, which is that he's a pilot, he's piloting the ship, who's gonna save everything. He's all set for the big hero move / the biggest ego move. But what have we learned in the middle of the story? We've learned that if you go into the Force with ego, then the dark side may take you. So what does he do? He always wanted to be a pilot, but at the final moment, let's go of the wheel. He's no longer in charge, no longer piloting. So Luke may go from farm boy to hero, but most importantly, the point of the story is he's going from ego to humility. And so at the end of the story, if the character embraces the need, then it's a hero story. If the character rejects the need and doubles down on the want, then it's a tragedy. So this was the form as it's generally understood in our storytelling culture. And of course, it can be used to tell an infinite number of stories. But I have to say, and it's a personal point of view, I feel like under all stories ever told for humans by humans, there is actually one unique story underneath, and it's the meta-human story. And I think on a certain level, it's always the same. And the story goes like this. Our forebears, fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers, elders, you name it, have either achieved amazing greatness or committed unspeakable sins. So how do we live up to their greatness or live down their sins? And how do we rank compared to them? That's it. That is the meta-human story, like I said, and it's in everything. It's of course very easy to spot in movies like Star Wars and so on and so forth, but really it's in everything. And I know we're going to do a Q&A, so if you guys want to throw out stories at me, if I know them, I'll tell you how this thing plays out in them. But that is my deepest held story belief, is that is the mono story at the root of everything. So, and by the way, if you think it doesn't exist in real life, then you have to take another look. Because look even at the bigger than life level that control our own lives. So look at George W. Bush, for instance, right? So his dad was a war hero, head of the CIA, president of the United States, big shoes to fill, right? And he was the ne'er-do-well, the guy who was never going to amount to anything, except he does become president, and then something happens. Literally your midpoint in the story, 9/11. And at that point, what was the one thing that the first Bush was, said to not have done was he couldn't get Saddam. He didn't get Saddam. So what is W going to do now? One up his dad. The only thing he can do that dad didn't do, now he's going to get Saddam. And Saddam Hussein had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11 whatsoever. Doesn't matter. That whole dynamic was at play, right? It's just like, how do I rank compared to my dad? How can I not only live up to him, but do the one thing he couldn't get to do? And look at where we are now with Trump, right? I mean, I'm recording this before the election, so who knows what's going to happen? But who can deny, whether you like him or not, and I'll be perfectly frank, I don't like him at all, but that, you know, the whole Trump story comes from a father that was a bigger than life figure that made him feel like he was better than everyone and yet never good enough. And a guy who's going to spend his life tragically trying to desperately prove him right and prove him wrong at the same time. And here we are. So this takes me to the next question, which is very often asked, which is story political? And I think what people mean by that really is story partisan. And I don't think it is, in the sense that you could very well imagine a story that is exploring a collectivist point of view, or a story that is exploring an individualistic point of view. So there's no inherent bias. In fact, I think that is the whole point of story, which is our shared humanity. It's about exploring other people's point of view. It's walking through the shoes. It's walking in the shoes, or seeing the world through the eyes of people who in real life you have no connection with, right? This is how you have stories about mafia people, about dictators, about serial killers, about, as well as you have from heroes and children. And that is the point. The point is the sharing of that common human experience, which is, of course, very important, because this is the fabric of living in society. And that is actually the difference between legitimate storytelling and propaganda. Because the point of propaganda is dehumanizing people, right? It's like, look at them, they're bad, we need to, you know, lock them up, kill them, whatever, right? That's the whole point of propaganda, is dehumanizing, and that is the exact opposite of story, which is sharing the human experience. So story may not be inherently partisan, but that does not mean it's symmetrical either. Certain things in life are not symmetrical, like time is not symmetrical. You remember yesterday, you don't remember tomorrow. And story works the same way. Take comedy, for instance, right? There's something that happened a few years ago that was really funny, like going back to the Bush years again. That's when the Daily Show with Jon Stewart was really gaining in popularity and influence in the culture. And Fox News decided, like, yeah, we can do this, you know, we can be funny too, we can do comedy. And they started this block, you know, that was supposed to be the counter programming to the Daily Show. And it was horrible, and they had to cancel it like after 5 minutes, because comedy is about punching up. It's telling truth to power. If you're on the side of power, it doesn't work, right? It's the poor guy making fun of the emperor who has no clothes. That's comedy. The emperor making fun of the poor guy who has no clothes. That's just cruelty. Does not work. So just like time, story is not symmetrical. It is always on the side of humanity versus oppression, of compassion versus cruelty, you know, of truth versus lies. And it's never on the side of putting kids in cages, right? But if story is a moral concept, and we know story doesn't judge, because otherwise we wouldn't have movies about mafia people, about dictators, about, I mean, hell, we have movies about Hitler, right? And, so how does story express its sense of morality? And the answer is, it does not have to, because it is the characters who do it themselves. And it all takes place with that final choice at the end. If they choose to run into the burning building to save people, it's a hero story. If they push people out of the way into the flames so they can get out, it's a tragedy. If they choose their family, wife and kids, it's a hero story. If they choose to become the new godfather, it is a tragedy. And through that final choice, this is how story is able to orient its moral universe without separating us from the people in the story that we're trying to, without disconnecting our common humanity. So there you go. That's how I think it works. This is kind of my compass, my true north that I usually always try to keep in mind when I'm writing and creating a story. I hope this helps you too. And I know we have a Q&A coming up, so I cannot wait to hear your questions.